You are cordially invited to a night at the opera with America's most cultured podcast, The Pod People. It's a me, Daniela Suave.
I'm Ben Sheets, and for this episode, I'm rubbing my hands together like Birdman.
You guys know who it is. It's the cursed Scottish gay, Cleveland Mosier.
I thought you were Welsh.
I'm a mutt.
We're here to talk about opera, which was Ben's pick. The 1987 Dario Argento giallo classic, a bopera, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
One of my favorite Argentos. I know one of yours as well, Ben.
Yeah, well, it's funny. This was like kind of the end of the era for Argento before he started making kind of mid movies. Because he had an incredible run from like mid 70s to 80s with like Deep Red and Suspiria and Tenebra and Opera.
Was
So
this
many good
Argento's last banger? He's still
I
alive.
think so. Honestly, I haven't seen a ton of his stuff after this one, but I haven't heard great things either.
Yeah, I don't think that I have either. Now that you mention it, well, this is sort of it's a classic Argento in many ways. It's got all of his hallmarks: the black gloved killer and the stylish giallo cinema flares. It's about an opera singer who is stalked by a mysterious killer after an accident with the lead role in a performance of Verdi's Macbeth leaves her, the understudy, as the new lead. And it seems like there's maybe some shenanigans that led to that as well. But this was your first bopera experience, Cleve. How did it find you?
I am a huge fan now as well. I loved it. Edge of my seat.
Yeah, it's legitimately tense at times.
Yeah, very exciting. I mean, it's what you'd come to expect from Argento at this point. Very stylish, very over the top. Lots of good, long, exaggerated kills with creative weapons. Yeah, it's pretty much everything you could want, I think.
Yeah, I think out of all of the Argento movies that I've seen, and granted I haven't seen them all, but this is probably the one with my favorite cinematography in terms of like the way the camera kind of floats around and moves around so dynamically. We get some crazy tracking shots throughout this.
Also just like an incredible setting too, right? Or rather many incredible settings, but you know, a lot of the film does take place in this like big gorgeous opera house, and for somebody with like Argento's stylistic sensibilities, it's just like there's so much you can do with that and to like such great effect, and it does so many cool things.
Can I just say, as someone who grew up backstage, grew up working on like small town productions and working at a theater as well, and all the fun technical stuff that goes on behind the scenes, I've never seen the chaos shown so accurately before. Whenever we go behind the curtain, there is just utter chaos. It's that kind of like synchronous chaos where like everything gets out on stage just in time and people are chatting and moving around, and it's all it's amazing no one's getting a sandbag on the head, and like the costumer is freaking out and trying to make things just right, and the director is just barely like keeping it all together and managing it. Like, it's so true. It's so earnest, and you have to like be involved in those sorts of like backstage performances and in theater to really like for that to really to understand and to be able to capture it and coordinate it in a movie that well.
One of my favorite details in this movie is that the director of this opera is a former horror film director who made the jump to opera, which I mean, it's very easy to see this kind of character as sort of Argento's own self-insert, right? But I just think that it's such a fun little detail that this multiple people comment on it in throughout the movie, that like he went from making these sort of exploitative like gory slasher movies to working in, he goes from low art to high art, right? And
Yeah.
I just think that it's perfect for the
Well,
setting
it's
of this
really
film.
funny because a lot of the characters complain about how non-traditional his approach to Macbeth is. Like
Yeah.
they call it gimmicky because he has like live ravens all over the place and
Yeah,
uh
the Ravens are
weird
very
sets.
important.
Yes, they are, as they should
Yeah,
be.
I love the little bit of like the actual opera that we see in this, because it's like this really interesting like sort of contemporary telling of Macbeth that's looks like it's set in like World War One, but
Mhm.
still the our protagonist, who is like playing Lady Macbeth, she still has this very sort of traditional operatic, all like sort of Wagner-esque costume with like this almost like golden armor that she's wearing. It's really, and then there's like the big skull like floating in the back of the stage, like looming over the battlefield.
Well, I read
Just
her costume is like European high society of the 40s. Like to me, it looked like they were definitely going for like a World War II era thing, like across the board. But yeah, that skull was so fucking cool, though, right? Like,
yeah, I don't know,
Yeah.
man. Like I've seen a lot of like European movies from the 40s and 50s. I've never seen anybody wearing an outfit like she was wearing. Like it's definitely exaggerated. It's got like all of these
oh sure, I mean it's opera.
golden, like these golden discs like sewn together like old armor. And she's holding a gun too during her aria, which is very like, all of this is, it's like very on the nose, but like nice sort of like foreshadowing for the rest of the film. You've got like this looming specter of death, that's just like hanging over her. You mentioned the ravens, Ben. They're a very important both metaphor, of course, but also like plot device in this movie for many reasons.
Yeah, and a
Go
great
ahead.
excuse to get some of the coolest shots in the movie. One of
Yes,
the
dude.
first shots we get is a close up on a raven, and the reflection in its eye is the opera going on. And
Yeah,
for
that's
like the 80s, it's insane that they got that shot.
Well, it's technically anything to do with the Ravens in this movie is some of the craziest and most impressive stuff I've seen. Like, if you're just like an average moviegoer, I could see you just like kind of shrugging that up and being like, "Oh, cool, they have ravens in the scene." But like, being able to train and have that many birds doing exactly what you need them to do at a given time in a scene, in a coordinated scene, is crazy. Because they even show like the chaos of the birds and like handling them. Like I think one of the opening in the opening scene, like the lead actress who's playing Lady Macbeth is like getting upset because the ravens are kind of flying around her and causing havoc while she's trying to sing.
Yeah, well, that's one of the inciting incidents, right? The Ravens have like so many important like plot driven moments throughout the movie too, and like, yeah, that's the first one, is that this opera is making use of like having live ravens all over the place, and the woman who is playing Lady Macbeth hates it so much she feels like they're bad luck, which also goes on with like the curse of Macbeth and whatnot, which we can talk more about. But they're bad luck, and they're staring at her, and they're cawing during her singing, and it keeps distracting her, and it leads her to run out into the street in a fit of rage, and gets hit by a car, which then is what puts our protagonist Betty, who's the understudy, into that lead role. But yeah, the opening credits this has like some of my favorite opening credits of like any Argento movie, especially, but just like movies in general, of like hearing this opera rehearsal going on in the background while we just sit on this close up of this irritated raven like croaking and cawing as the credits roll to the left of it. I know the working with these ravens was famously one of the most difficult parts of the production of this film. They were very difficult to work with, for all the reasons you stated, Cleve. But apparently, it would take like the whole crew hours to wrangle them at the end of the day because they just had them like out on set. They were just like flying around set. So they had to, like, before everybody could leave, get them back in their cages before the end of the day, right? So they would just take hours trying to wrangle all of these loose ravens. I think I read that they used something like 160 ravens in this movie, or 140 ravens, and at the end of production, only 60 were accounted for. All of the rest had managed to escape throughout the course of the production. So they lost over half of the ravens they used in this movie. They just got out, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, well, you can imagine like frustrated actors like leaving and trying to like come and go, and or technical people like moving equipment in and out of the building, and like of course a raven or two is just gonna fly out if they have that many in the building. Like, good lord.
Right, they can fly up into the rafters and find their ways to get into the attic and like find like somewhere to squeeze themselves out of into like the city or whatever. Like, it's and like they're smart as shit too. They're also like the smartest birds, and so I can imagine they were just like an absolute fucking pain to work with, but man, used to such incredible effect in this movie.
Yeah, they magpie, they steal, they take valued objects, they remember too.
They hold grudges.
They hold grudges.
Which ends up being a big plot point in this movie. We won't get to that quite yet, but
and that was super cool. I loved that. Oh, and they shit. That's the other thing, right? Like, yes. That many ravens like flying around the building, shitting everywhere. Oh man, that alone must have been difficult.
Imagine being on a film set for like 10 to 12 hours in a day, like trying to do your job, and there's just like 80 loose ravens just flying around, shitting and cawing and certainly stealing stuff. I mean, this is one of those things like you probably could not have done it if you were shooting like on set sound. I'm sure it was just cacophonous.
Yeah. That's the funniest thing because this is very much in the Italian giallo tradition of
not recording audio.
Yeah.
I bet there were many people on that set who were like the prima donna at the beginning in the film who get so frustrated with the ravens and she runs out into traffic. But you mentioned like the super close up of the raven's eye, which is used more than once in this movie, which is nice because I feel like it serves as sort of simulacrum of like the lens of the camera, but also to remind you that the ravens are here this whole time and they're watching and they're remembering. The ravens know who the killer is, right? The ravens have seen have seen it all.
It's great foreshadowing. I mentioned using the ravens for camera stuff, and this movie is so full of like long steady cam shots and tracking shots. Very Brian De Palma-esque. But you get that incredible shot where it's from the perspective of a raven flying around in the theater. And it's like tracking down and up, and just imagining how they shot it is so crazy to me.
How they kept focus. I'm guessing they probably had like a camera operator like on like a trapeze wire or something. I don't just like swinging him around about like the theater. That's the only way that I could imagine them like being able to get that shot and still have like any sort of camera control. Before we had drone shots and it was inside, so you couldn't do a helicopter.
Either that or like a giant crane. That would be tricky indoors, like you said. Yeah,
it's crazy too because like it's
crazy.
A beautiful old theater, and I can't imagine them getting away with having all those ravens loosed in there and all those equipment, and like whatever technical equipment they needed to get those shots, like
pooping on everything,
like just havoc. That must have been a nightmare.
I'd be curious to know. I'm sure you could look it up. Whether they shot this on location at like an actual opera house, or if they built like a set in a soundstage or something.
I think that the
Probably a little
backstage
column
stuff,
A, column B.
all of the backstage stuff, I think was a soundstage.
Yeah, because I feel like you really could not get away with having like over 100 loose ravens flying around in like an actual
Sounds like it.
like an actual opera house. Maybe, I don't know. The 80s were a different time, man.
Yeah, man.
We should probably talk a little bit about our protagonist, who
Yeah.
is Betty, played by Christina Marsalek. How do y'all like her in this movie?
I thought she was
I
great.
think she's great. Yeah, and I think the person they got for her dub, it was pretty good too.
I thought she did great, and I thought she was like, really sympathetic in the movie too. And I like her performance a lot. The reason I asked how y'all thought she did is because I saw that like Argento in like one of his books or something said that she was like hands down the most difficult actress he ever worked with. And
Oh, really?
I just saw that blurb. Like, I don't know why she was difficult, but it seems like, and it's like, was she really difficult, or was Argento just an asshole?
There are a couple of staging sequences in the plot that make sense to me in that respect. I'm not going to get into plot specifics, but towards the end, we have a pretty significant jump in time, and the way that is blocked and set up feels like an actor didn't show or something. Like, it feels like there is, to me, like something like hinky, like technically that happened, like in the scheduling or whatever. And I feel like
she's there.
She's there, but like it's kind of hard to explain. It's more of a feeling, but like the setup of it and the way it's sort of, maybe it's like just the way it's cut together. It felt kind of slapdash. I don't know.
Let's come back to that, because I definitely do have thoughts about the part of the film that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so did the American distributor for this film, which was Orion. But anyway, we'll talk about that when we get to the end of the film. But I really like Betty in this. I like that she really feels like a like young, talented singer, but lacking the confidence that's sort of required for the role that's thrust upon her. She's a very reluctant star, but she does. Everybody loves her, and she's great, and she's got an incredible voice, and obviously she's got this mysterious killer who's infatuated with her, and he sort of implies that he had something to do with getting the other woman like hit by the car or whatever. Like, he had some role in that, so he was like elevating Betty,
and some mysterious role in her past as well.
Yes.
I love her reluctance. It really helps you relate with her as a protagonist. Because so often the stereotype that we're even set up with at the beginning of the film is that these opera singers are prima donnas, and they are full of themselves and sleep around, and that's even commented on in the movie, right? Like, and there's like a whole culture that's built up around these singer celebrities. And her character is anything but. She defies all of those like negative tropes and conventions, and it makes her incredibly relatable. Like, this opportunity is thrust on her, and she's scared by it, as anyone would be. And she's not sure she's ready, and but she's confident enough that she does follow through with it, and she tries. And I found that whole struggle to be really relatable and endearing with her character.
And it sure isn't easy. It sure doesn't make it any easier that there's a psycho on the loose who keeps tying her up and forcing her to watch him kill people who are close to her. Doesn't make her job any easier.
Those sequences are horrifying. But I will say, one of the most endearing parts of Betty is how much she hates the cops.
Yes. And as
after her first show, someone knocks on her door, and it's a dude with a flower, and she's super flattered and is like, "You're my first fan." And then he reveals that he's a police officer, and her mood completely changes.
It's like, oh, you're not actually here to congratulate me. You're here to interrogate me. That inspector, what did you call him, Cleve? He's like the most handsome he's the most handsome man alive.
Yeah, like, well, yeah, it was something funny. It was like, oh, I think it was just like Detective Sexy or something.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
goddamn.
Inspector Sexy or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. It's like, damn, dude, they picked the most conventionally attractive man to play this, like, washed up detective they could find. Like, holy
Go
shit.
go gadget cum gutters.
Yeah, like, he was, like, wow, yeah, like, they really found, like, the most, like, guy that they could find for this role, and it almost takes you out of it. It's like, oh, because you see him like interacting in the scene. It's like, okay, he's one of the other actors because he looks like one so much, and it's like,
Yeah,
nope,
he's like
an
he's
actor.
like cartoonishly handsome.
Yeah,
But it is funny because it's like she's very like taken with him at first when he comes to like get her autograph and like give her the rose and everything, but then it's like, oh, he's a cop. She's all of a sudden like, nope, not interested anymore.
You know what? Respect.
Respect. Good for Betty. Her instincts are right, more than she knows.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to, mention we talked already a little bit about like the kills, but I want to get more into that because this movie has some of my favorite like Argento kill scenes. I love that like Betty is a unwilling observer to all of these because this man in this sort of in this black hood keeps showing up and he ties her to things and puts like tape with pins sticking up like right under her eyes so she can't close her eyes without lacerating her eyelids, so she's forced to watch as he just like brutally murders like first like the guy she's sleeping with and then like the costume designer on the play. And like I love the fucking like pins under the eyes.
Yeah, it's
Oh, it's
horrifying.
terrifying.
I
Tactile too, because like you can feel it, almost because you know how getting pricked by a pin feels,
and you know how it feels when something gets caught under your eyelid and starts like
Yeah.
like scratching your eye and stuff.
It's-
I saw that Argento came up with that idea because he would always talk about how frustrated he would get when people would like look away during like the scary parts in his horror films, and he would joke like, I wish I could tape needles under their eyes so they wouldn't be able to look away. And so that he actually did that for this movie.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. What a fucking freak. But also, like, it's such a cool image. It's like so like viscerally unsettling, like eye trauma is like hard for a lot of people
High up
watching
my
movies.
list.
Yeah, I don't like eye trauma, or for me it's like really tooth trauma that fucks me up, but like eye trauma is bad. It's just like there's so much like incredible macro photography in this too. Like we've already talked about like the close-ups of the raven's eyes. There's watching is like viewing is obviously like very central to the themes of this movie. But like, yeah, we get so many like incredible, like extreme close-ups of her eyes, with these needles under them, and they've put some blood like on her eyelids and like dripping off her eyelashes, where she's already been nicked by these needles. It reminds me of like I think you mentioned it, we were watching it together, Cleve, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre,
Yeah.
like some of those like extreme close-ups of eyes.
Yeah, it's like I would say like
so cool.
this movie, Texas Chainsaw, and Saw 2 are like the eye trauma trilogy. For just like all those like macro eye trauma shots. Like, I mean, like it's a trope as old as time, and I think like a lot of horror films do that shot where like the sharp thing is like right up near the eye. Recently, Resident Evil Rise did that. But
Evil Dead Rise.
Evil Dead, whatever. Those films in particular, but this one I think more than any. Like I'm struggling to think of a film where the eye trauma was as hard to watch, because like in Saw 2, when it's like, oh, the key's behind your eye, and they're like trying to like pull it out, like the eye's already had the damage done to it, so like it's scary, and they've got those really great shots of like it coming in really close in amongst all the crazy speed rampy bits because it's Saw. But and it's like those were my first films where like I saw that and I was like, oh my god, that's so terrifying with the eye trauma. But this one in particular is I think the most rough because there's just a bit of damage whenever she flutters her eyes because she's trying to keep them open, but also like it's hard enough to like not blink. I guess Clockwork Orange is also like kind of similar in that respect when he's like forced to watch. But that machine is just holding his eyes open. Like here, it's like, there's a punishment. There's an immediate punishment if you do flutter your eyes.
I said it while we were watching it, and I'll say it again. If you think the eye trauma in this movie is bad, we got to get you watching more fucking Fulci movies, because Fulci is really the Italian giallo king of eye trauma. Almost all of his movies have some kind of like gratuitous eye trauma. I mean, we watched we watched The Beyond a couple years ago, right? Like, isn't there a dude who gets like doesn't the spider like bite his eye? Is a spider like eats out his eye?
His eye out. Yeah, it's pretty dope. Yeah, it's so spooky. What I also love about those shots is I think in other circumstances it would be corny, but Argento is like the king of like POV shots. And showing you like, oh, from their perspective. And I was already so like fucked up by like and skeezed out by like the needles being taped under the eye. That it really did a number on me when like we then get the eye cam and there are those shots from her perspective where the needles are like just out of focus, like right in her vision, and she's watching. And I felt it. Like, and normally it would be corny, but it really lands. Just like the way that she's looking around, like they got a great, it captures her head movement. Well, you really believe that you're like looking through her eyes and, like that these needles are taped to you and you just can't look away.
I feel like you hit on something really important there, that like when you're saying that it's like almost corny, but like it like hit so hard. I feel like that's like really giallo distilled as a subgenre of horror, is that like it's simultaneously, yes, obviously very corny, but also so visceral. I think that's like really a balance that like no other genre of film does to the same degree, I think.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, Argento's the master of it.
I would even contend this movie isn't that gratuitous or over the top, but it feels extreme because every bit of violence we get is so tactile.
I think there are a couple of like pretty gratuitous moments. Like, no, it's not like a ton, but especially that first like kill scene where he's like making her watch as he kills like her boyfriend, and he's got that like big triangular knife, very much obvious how inspired Malignant was by this movie. Particularly, it was just like the shape of that blade. But when he first stabs him, and he stabs him like under the jaw through like the bottom of his mouth, and as he screams, you can see like the blade inside his mouth, like stabbing through.
It's the tactile details, like
that's
that
pretty gruesome.
Yeah, it was impressive. I in the moment I was so caught up in it I couldn't even tell how they did it. Like I'd have to watch it again and see, because like I'm sure like they just have like a little blade prop like in his mouth, but it really does look like it went all the way up and through. And
yeah,
obviously it didn't, but like that's damn good makeup. It really. It lines up really well, because you can see the bit of the knife like at the base of his throat too, and like the blood like pours out of his mouth. Like I would think if there was something in there, like it would set it off. Like it's that exaggerated like super bright red giallo blood that like really looks more like paint than blood, but still like it's so gruesome, and I feel like it does like a little bit of like a punch in on his mouth on that shot too. Maybe I'm imagining that. I can't remember for sure, but for like how good it is that like it's kind of hard for us to even remember like how they technically did it, and like what was happening, because we're just so caught up in the scene and in the moment. It's impressive.
And I feel like that's like the first like burst of extreme violence in this movie too, because like there is another kill earlier where the killer's like in the box like watching the opera, and like the usher comes along and tells him like, hey, you can't be here, and he kills him by like shoving the back of his neck through like a coat hanger. But I feel like it sort of like cuts away from that a little bit, where like it's not quite as visceral. And then like when the killer like takes her captive the first time and like forces her to watch him kill somebody, it's like that's like how it starts, just like this fucking huge ridiculous looking knife just like spearing through the bottom of a man's jaw. It's just like,
my other favorite part of that scene is like, for the majority of the film, it's scored by opera and classical music, but for the kill scene, Argento does something similar to Phenomena, where he uses like old school heavy metal.
yes, that's some of my favorite stuff. I was actually earlier today, I was Googling around looking for who did those songs for this movie, and I was able to track it back to this 80s Italian heavy metal band called Gao that just like never really took off. They have like one full-length album that came out in 1984 and a handful of demos, and they wrote 2 songs for this movie under the pseudonym Steel Grave. And I loved that shit. And I was kind of surprised to hear that they, I mean, I haven't listened to the rest of their music. Maybe it's trash, but they're really just like a no-name band. But the 2 songs they use for this movie are bops. And I do love that too, in like the contrast to the opera that is used so heavily in the rest of the movie. It's like these are like the exploitation, like horror movie, like gruesome low culture moments of the film. It's like the introduction of low culture into this high culture setting, and it's like we can't use opera during these scenes. We got to use the music of the low culture. We got to use heavy metal, right? And then as soon as it's over, then it goes back to the nicer, prettier music. The score is outside of like the pieces of opera, like the actual opera that we hear in the movie. The score is a Goblin and Brian Eno collab, which is pretty fucking swag.
Yeah, amazing.
I mean, Goblin, no stranger to Argento scores, of course, but to get Brian Eno in on the mix as well is pretty tight.
No, we were saying this the other day when we were watching Sorcerer. Not for the podcast, it's just like Tisa and I think we were just like watching the movie because we wanted to watch it. And that score was Tangerine Dream. And we kind of settled on like the fact that if there was a banger score, like a banger synth score from the 70s and 80s, like it was either fucking Goblin or Tangerine Dream.
Or Tangerine Dream. And yep, that's pretty much the case.
Or John Carpenter.
Or John Carpenter, of course.
Trifecta. Yeah. I will say, I don't think the score in this was quite as iconic as like the Suspiria score,
of course,
or Deep Red, but it did work really well in the context of the film.
I mean, I think it's intentionally more understated, right? Like it's not supposed to be at the forefront, and that's also why you get like the godfather of ambient, Brian Eno in on the mix, right? To sort of like tone down the more like in your face, like flashier Goblin synth score that you'd be used to from a movie like this. Because I mean the setting of the film revolves so heavily around music, well, opera music specifically. So many scenes when they're just like in Betty's apartment or whatever talking, it's like at the beginning of the scene, the first thing she'll do is like go in and like turn on the radio, and she's always listening to the opera station, right? So just like during all of these conversations, all of these dialogue scenes, there's just like loud opera playing in the background. And then you've got like the heavy metal shit for like the kills and the chases, and then all the other times it's like there's still got to be something there, but it's it's more understated. It's not like drawing attention to itself. I think it's really smart. The use of music in this movie is really clever.
Yeah, I really like it. I really like the use of diegetic music, like you were saying. It really plays into some of the tension later on, too. For example, in the apartment scene, where she's kind of being hunted down by the killer in her
Yeah,
apartment, she blasts the opera music to kind of disorient him. And I thought that was great. And it kind of built on the tension just underlying in a super cool
that's
way.
that whole sequence is incredible. It's really long and drawn out. But I want to use it as an opportunity to talk about the least important consequential aspect of that scene, but the one that like sticks with me the most is I want to talk about my favorite non-character in this movie, Daniele Soave.
Great name.
Who is a character who I don't know if we ever actually see him at all in this movie, but for like 10-15 minutes of the film, people just will not stop saying his name.
Daniel Suave.
It's like this is later when after she's like told the handsome inspector that she has been there at the scene of all of these killings, and that like the guy ties her up and makes her watch and then leaves and everything. He was like, okay, go back to your house. And he's like, don't worry, I'm going to send over one of my best detectives, Danielle Suave, to look after you while I'm gone. And then she gets like a phone call and she's like, hello. He's like, hello. Yes, it's me, Danielle Suave. I'm coming up to look after you. And knocks on the door. She's like, is it Danielle Suave? And he's like, yes, it is me, Danielle Suave. And then her like agent comes over later and she's like, downstairs I met a policeman and his name was Danielle Suave. And she's like, wait a minute, Danielle Suave? But Danielle Suave is in my apartment right now. Who was that you met downstairs? And then they find that Danielle Suave has been murdered. And it's just like, this character is so unimportant, but he's got this just like ridiculous name that they just will not stop saying. And I just
The fact that
Like
they
I
say
said,
his full name every time just makes it so much
Have to.
funnier.
You gotta say his full name. You can't just say Daniel. It's Daniel Suave.
yeah, and it's like they find his body and they're like not sure like if it's actually him, and they like open his wallet and it does like a punch in like on his ID or whatever. And it says Danielle Suave. It's like
Something else
I
in
don't
the
know why
plot
that got me so much.
that is important to the plot that we should mention that happens during this sequence is before she's tied up and forced to watch, we don't see her have sex with the guy, but we see the aftermath. And weirdly phrased, but like we see them like talking to each other afterwards, her being like her apologizing and saying sorry, it never works. I can't.
She's like, I'm no good in bed.
I'm no good in bed. I'm just it doesn't work for me. And he's like, it's cool, it's whatever. But like, and we don't really know like specifically what that means. But like, she just has a hard time performing, which is cool because like that also kind of plays into that aspect of like performance anxiety and like like playing her role as Lady Macbeth and her not sure if she's ready to do it or if she's going to do it well. And like, well, no wonder she's worried about that. She's also like has those same like insecurities and uncertainties about like intimacy as well. And we also see that she has these dreams about, like, crawling through vents and seeing some woman being, like, tortured by this same black-gloved killer. Before she ever sees him, like, he's already made appearances in her dreams, and she's had this strange effect on her, and we don't know why. And I really like all that stuff. I think it's a really cool way to set things up. I for a while, I was sort of thinking, like, oh, is she the killer? Is it, like, a personality thing? Is she a Tyler Durden? Like whenever she falls asleep, she becomes this killer, and she's seeing it. She's forced to watch because it's actually happening behind her own eyes or something. Like, is it a metaphor? That's where my head was going with it. I'm really glad it wasn't that.
You're malignant brained.
I'm
You're malignant pilled. Yeah.
Well, that's what I figured too. Is like I've seen Malignant. I know it was inspired by this genre. We have a black elf killer. Okay, is that what they're doing? Like, is the killer inside her head all along?
Yeah.
Funny because in Malignant it's literal. But I really like that wasn't the case, but it's played up just enough that you kind of think of it as a red. I thought of it almost as a red herring.
Well, I'm glad you bring this up because I think we should start getting into like the end of the film because I think this is where I have the most thoughts and also probably the most problems.
Okay.
I like this movie, but I like this movie a lot, in fact, but I think it kind of stumbles around a lot at the end, in ways that I have sort of mixed feelings on, but kind of negative feelings. But the dream thing is a good segue into that because it is revealed at the end through their plan becomes like, oh well, the Ravens were present at an earlier killing, and he killed some of the Ravens too. The killer killed some of the Ravens that were like flapping around. It's like, oh well, they have great memories, right? So they'll let's at this key point of the performance, we're gonna release all of these ravens. They just crash the cage of ravens through a window on stage.
The most dramatic way they could do it, yeah.
And just like release all these ravens, and like, yeah, sure enough, the ravens flying around. That's when we get that great shot of, like Ben talked about earlier, going over the opera, and like swooping down on all of these people, the literal bird's eye view. Love all of this, by the way. I know I introed this with my problems, but I love all of this.
Yeah.
But it reveals, because the ravens do, they remember the killer, they find him and they attack him. Gasp, it was Inspector Sexy. He was the killer all along. One of the ravens like gouges out his eye, more eye trauma. I love it that they've got like his eye rolling around on the floor, and like one of the ravens comes by and eats it. Really gross.
Yeah, it reminded me of like Piranha 3D.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, yeah, he escapes and he captures Betty again, and then gets his villain's monologue where he explains everything. And this is where it takes us back to the dream she's been having. It's of course revealed that they're not dreams at all, but repressed memories. And that's why she's seen this killer, this black hooded killer before, because he's always been a part of her life. This, I think, is a little bit unbelievable because, like, the guy, like, the sexy inspector does not look that much older than her. So it's like, that I don't quite buy. But he reveals is like, oh, your mom was a weird murderous freak, and she and I would kidnap and torture and murder women together, and as like your mom thought it was sexy, and we would bang, and she taught me to love killing and all of this stuff, and so then when she died, like, I'm coming after you because I want you to love me because you remind me so much of your mother. This I do not love this. How do you guys feel about this? I'd like to get an outside perspective.
I think
I feel like it's just a little sloppy because it feels like hastily explained in the third act. I do really
and not hinted at in a meaningful way either.
It's hinted at, but just a little too subtly.
Really?
Like in the dreamy abstract sequences, they cut back to the mother who's being tortured, and the black glove killer several times, but it's done in such an abstract way that you can't completely gather what's been going on. So to just kind of sloppily explain it all in a big villain's monologue, just
and I don't feel like there was like. It never seemed like this character had like sort of a traumatic experience with her mother, that like her mother was like wantonly cruel and like beat her or anything, like just like anything that would like give us the idea that like she has mother issues and that like her mother was a bad person. I don't think that's like really even suggested in the film.
I have thoughts.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. I actually disagree a little bit. I think it is while it's not set up so much directly with her, minus the vague dreams, where we see those events happening, there is this really cool narrative parallel with the girl in the apartment. So we didn't talk about this, but after the Suave sequence, when she's trying to get away from the killer, a young girl who we learn has been watching throughout the scenes, because we see her in the opening scene with the protagonist, we see a silhouette watching from the vents, and we think it's the killer.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, it's revealed as she's trying to escape that no, it's a young girl watching from the vents who it turns out found a way into them and can and just watches everybody living their lives. Again, voyeuristically, there's that whole theme of voyeurism and being watched. She crawls into the vents with her, and the girl is like, "Here, I'll take you to safety, and we'll go to another room." And while they're traveling through the vents, she asks her "Why do you come here? Why do you do this?" And she says, "Well, I like to come here and escape whenever my parents are fighting." And she says, "Oh, does your..." And it's kind of awkward here too, but she says "Oh, does your dad hit your mom?" And she says, "Yes."
Do they hit each other?
They hit each other. Right. Yeah. That's right.
Do they hit each other?
That's actually important. You're right, because she does express it mutually. And they get into the apartment, and the mother shows up, and she's like, "Who is this?" "It's my friend." She's like, "You need to get the fuck out of here. That's weird. You're an adult. What are you doing?" Crawling around vents.
With my young daughter, yeah.
For the police are going to be called. And our protagonist hates the police, so she's out of there. I really like that parallel, that we have this young girl watching from the events. Her parents, fight and hurt each other, and there's, and she watches to escape. And we find out that our protagonist was the same when she was a child, and she was in the vents or somewhere hiding and watching. And, it left this imprint on her when she was a child, and now the killer has returned, and he's forcing her to watch these things again and to remember. And I think that's dope. I really like all those themes and how they kind of play into each other. I do agree. Really the hardest part is when you've already mentioned it. That's the age difference between the two doesn't really line up. Part of that isn't just the fact that he's shown to be not that much older than her, but also her character is supposed to be younger than the actress portraying her. And so
yeah, she's supposed to be in her early 20s, but even so, he looks like...
Don't they say that she's 17 or 18?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
At the beginning, you know what it is? They say, it's okay, you can play the role of Lady Macbeth. Verity's original Lady Macbeth.
Verity's original, Lady Macbeth was 17. Yeah, no, I think Betty's at least in her 20s. She has a whole apartment and everything. She's an adult. She's not very old though, and he seems like that he was, in maybe his early 30s. That's how he looks, at least. He's very youthful and handsome looking. He's not an older man, which I feel like, yeah, I feel like is sort of what you'd need. And I think you bring up a lot of good points about the parallels between her and the little girl, and that stuff is definitely there. I just feel like it's so clumsily explained, clumsily handled in that reveal, and it just feels like it also just sort of feels like a weird motivation for the killer. It's oh, your mom also was a psycho, and I loved her, and she taught me to be a psycho, but now she's gone, so I want to make you a psycho so we can be together.
Externally, it skeezed me out, and
it's skeezy.
It's skeezy as hell, because it's never really made clear whether or not he's her father, too. And, I think the assumption is not, but also, it is. And
it's not outside the realm of possibility. And that's why I'm saying,
possibility, and also,
the role should have been given to an older actor,
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Argento kind of infamous for, filming a rape scene with a teenage daughter?
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
It's skeezy. It skeezes me out. I don't know, man. That's pretty fucking weird. And so those things, that kind, knowing that also kind of made things kind of.
I think narratively, it's fine to be skeezy. He's the villain. It should be skeezy. Sure. You should be grossed out and disgusted by him. But it's just I don't know. It just feels like a kind of like clumsy villain's monologue there at the end. And he's like, oh, he's got her blindfolded, and he like puts the gun in her hand, and he's like, I'm gonna make you shoot me for some reason, so I can die instead of being caught.
I kind of like that,
Um,
like on paper, because at that point, she makes it clear to him she's not interested. She's not like her mother, and he's like,
right.
well, in that case, I might as well go out in flames. And that's fine. Like that kind of works. But
Yeah,
the
sure.
delivery and the way it's set up is a little bit clumsy. But I do like that once again we get a POV perspective with her, where we're seeing from underneath the blindfold, and we can just barely make out what's beneath it, and it feels again
Mhm.
they do make it feel like you're wearing a blindfold.
Yeah.
It doesn't just feel like they have a cloth over the camera, which even if they do, they worked it right, and it feels good. Like when she's like holding the gun and she's not certain.
What did y'all think about the sort of fake out with the fire and everything?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna get into.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of silly.
After she believes that she, kills him, shoots him, and then the room catches on fire, and she escapes, leaving his burning body behind. Then we get the film's epilogue, which I have very mixed feelings. I think mostly negative once again on the film's epilogue. Orion did too. They wanted Argento to cut this entire section out of the movie for its American release. He did not, which, I can respect him sticking to his guns. But I also kind of side with Orion on this one, that I think this part sort of undermines other things in the movie. We cut forward in time. She's in Switzerland now, in the Alps, with the director, and the director of the play, who he's the one who devised the whole Raven plan. And then it's like,
he has like a girlfriend, but he's one of those Italian directory guys.
oh
And
yeah,
he's a she's kind of cool with it because they're weird and European, and
yeah, he's a sexy hotshot director. He's got all kinds of bitches. But yeah, so they're in Switzerland. I think are they doing a movie or another opera or something? I don't know. But it's like they get a phone. She gets a phone call, or he gets a phone call. And it's like, oh, it turns out that the killer, that actually wasn't his body. While she was blindfolded, he set up a mannequin wearing his clothes, and that's what she shot and burned. And he's actually alive and still trying to kill her. And then he shows up, and we get some nice shots of her like running through this like beautiful like Swiss mountain valley. But, he like catches her, and she's like, oh, you know what? I am so glad that you actually did kill all of those people, and I think it's hot and sexy, and turns out I'm exactly like my mother. And then a bunch of cops show up out of nowhere, although she did see the dogs. That's how she knew that they were coming, and the cops just like apprehend him. That's sort of the end of the movie.
Yeah.
She goes and like rolls around like in some flowers. She's like, turns out I'm actually not like anybody else. I'm built different. I'm
like
actually
other girls.
It's like, I'm not like all the other girls. I'm built different. I actually, while most people hate bumblebees and lizards, I actually love them. And I'll show you by lifting this small rock off of a lizard so it can run away and be happy. And I'm gonna roll around in some flowers. I'm actually like extra gentle. It turns out that like most people who aren't murderers, like they're just like normal, but I'm like extra not a murderer.
I kind of love it. I think that films from this era, and even still today, have a habit of wanting to leave you uncertain, and thinking maybe the killer's still out there, or that maybe our protagonist by the end of the movie has become the monster themselves. And they almost do that, where it's like, oh, is she lying to the cops there? She loves to do that. Like, maybe she is that evil, and they just happen to catch him there. And, like, who knows? But then they take it that one step further right before credits. Nope, she's happy. She's good, and she's a nice person, and we should be happy for her. I kind of love that. It's stupid. It's not like necessarily good or like an impactful way to end your movie, but I enjoy it. I think it's fun.
But it doesn't, like, when the actual credits do roll, it doesn't it doesn't leave you with any like understanding that you wouldn't have had if they just rolled credits after the killer quote unquote died in the fire. It's like that would have been a fine that's what I'm saying. You gain absolutely nothing. You gain absolutely nothing except a beautiful setting.
Well, and I will say, from literal perspective, that whole scene just feels like it ties a bow on things way too nicely. But I almost feel like maybe it's more deceptive than it seems, because it's so picturesque and bright and colorful, where the rest of the movie isn't, and it hits on all of these points that I would imagine our main character Betty would have like inserted herself in like a fantasy. So it almost makes me consider whether that last sequence is even real.
I think that's an okay reading. I just, even if that's the case, like I don't know what it would what it adds to the film, though. For me at least.
Sure,
I don't know. Maybe
sure.
it's like she's been so traumatized by her experiences that she's created a more beautiful fantasy in her brain, even though if it is a fantasy, like her friend, the director who helped save her life, like gets brutally murdered.
True, yeah.
And the killer that, if it is a fantasy, the killer who died in the fire instead gets arrested. It's like I still, like, even if it is fantasy, like I don't know if it like doesn't add anything to the film, really.
Yeah, no, it is a very clumsy finale, I think.
It feels
look at it.
It just feels strange, because I mean, it feels so disjointed from the rest of the film, which has, like very, I feel like, very clear themes and intentions and motivations, and it's just like that tacked on to the end. I don't know. Maybe I need to like read more about it or think about it. Maybe I'm too dumb for Argento's vision, but I don't know.
No, I don't think you are. I think that seems like a pretty reasonable read for what's presented to us in the movie that isn't that deep. Like, it's a crazy, vibrant slasher.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, and it has some great themes in it, and I think that they're expressed pretty directly for the most part. And I don't know if there is that much more to read into it. I think, if anything, a lot of those decisions and that leave us a little that leave us with our heads cocked are ones that probably happened because of production, that probably happened because of crazy scheduling or people acting like prima donnas or being difficult to work with. Like, that's so often the case with movies, right? Like, someone gets sick and can't make it that day, and they have to like rewrite. They have to do rewrites and stuff. Like,
yeah.
So often, like that's why, is because it turns out, hey, productions are really difficult to work on.
Yeah.
And people are chaotic.
I think you're totally right, but I don't know if that's the case in this instance, just because like how hard Argento fought like to have this epilogue like still in the movie, at least for like the US release. Like, it means he was happy with it. It means he thought it was important to the film. If it was something that ended up sloppy because of the chaos that comes from movie making, I don't know, I think he would be more willing to be like, it was a nice experiment, but it doesn't like add to the film. But he obviously feels different.
I have one more theory about that.
Yeah, go for it.
That man got through a really
we love theories.
Big old, this is the game theory. Like, big old, put on your tinfoil hats with me, right? For this really crazy idea. But what if Argento had such a hellish time on this production because, I mean, look at it, right? All the ravens in the theater, and like apparently, like the actress was a prima donna, like that was difficult to work with. Look at all of that information. Also, like sounds like Argento was kind of hard to work with too. So who knows?
That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know how hard she actually was to work with,
like,
but
regardless, that production must have been hell, right? My man just wanted a vacation in the Swiss Alps for the epilogue, and the film budget would have paid for it, right?
and you know what? That I think is not even that far fetched of a theory. I think that actually
right?
makes a lot
put on your
of sense.
tinfoil hats for this wild thing. He just wanted
It's like,
a vacation.
they just wanted to go to Switzerland for a
And
little
I
while.
can't blame him. I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, all these travel shows and movies that had to go from location to location. Like Tom Cruise has said it himself in interviews, right? Like that he takes a lot of these movies just so we can have like a paid vacation to like crazy countries and stuff. That's a known part of the industry.
Yeah, totally.
And
I mean, this was
like business is an excuse to do awesome travel.
This was a pretty hellish production, enough so that a lot of people thought that the Macbeth curse had transferred to the production of the film as well. I think an actor died on set. I don't know which actor. I don't know who. Might have been one of the extras, but there was at least one death during the production of this film. So,
God, is that documented? Like,
I don't know. So honestly, your hypothesis about an epilogue in the Alps, so that they could take a little vacation, maybe not so far fetched after all. Are y'all ready to rate this?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Ben, you start. This was your pick, a great pick.
Yeah, sure. So this is probably one of my favorite Argentos, if not my favorite. It is a little sloppy at the end, a little messy. But man, oh man, there's so many good shots and sequences. I'm gonna give it a strong 4.5 out of 5. Big recommendation.
Tease, could you go next?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm with you on a lot of that. This is definitely one of my favorite Argentos as well. It has some of my favorite sequences. It's been a long time since I'd seen this movie before this. I'd sort of forgotten how clunky that ending is. And in my memory, this was a 4.5 out of 5. I do think I'm going to knock it to a 4, just because I think like the last 10-15 minutes does not do the film a lot of favors. But overall, yeah, really, really fantastic film, and definitely still a big recommendation despite my problems with the end. I think the rest of the film more than makes up for it. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5.
Okay. I asked for you to go next because I was torn between a 4 and a 4.5. But thinking about it, personally, like I already said, while I fully agree, the ending is kind of messy. I also found that charming, so it didn't bother me, and I even liked like the roses and butterflies and happiness in a field bit at the end. It's stupid. It's really dumb, but I'm smiling, like still talking about it and thinking about it. I think because the scenes were so visceral, and I remember like distinctly like being pulled forward and like having to get closer to the screen to like, because I was so like tense and nervous about what was happening and in shock at like the bit of blood and her eyes flickering under those needles. I'm gonna give it a 4.5. It's I almost gave it a 4. God damn it, it's really good, and I got a lot out of it. I could see giving this movie a much lower score as well. I could see not liking this movie very much, but man, I fucking loved it. Yeah, 4.5, I think.
Cool. Well, that will give Opera an average of 4.3 out of 5. Definitely a resounding recommendation from the three of us. It's on Shudder. If you have a Shudder subscription, definitely go check it out there if you haven't seen it before. Even if you have, maybe it's time for a revisit.
Yeah, I think it's on Tubi as well. So if you don't pay for Shudder, it is available for free with commercials.
Hell yeah. Another big win for Tubi. We love it. we out here. Next week is a Patreon pick. This pick comes courtesy of our honorary pod boy, Sam. And Sam has picked for us something very different. A film from 2021 from Senegal called Saloum. I've heard some things about this movie, but I haven't seen it. Have any of us seen it? I don't think so.
No.
That's why we
I'm
love
excited.
Patreon picks.
Before the podcast, and I thought y'all were talking about.
You thought it was Salo.
Yeah, I thought you guys were talking about Sallow, which I also haven't seen. So Sallow, Saloon.
Talk
Uh,
about perverted
Salem.
Italians. Huh?
Yeah. No, we're not talking about Salo next week. We're talking about Saloum. So yeah, that's I'm excited. Cleve, I know we're not together. We're recording remotely. Do you have a sponsor?
Oh fuck.
Or
No.
I'm channeling the sponsor shelf into your brain.
Oh, my brain! I feel. Episode was brought to you by a skeleton in a fitted snapback. I don't know what a snapback is, but I'm getting a very clear signal of the word snapback. We're snapping back to the past with a skeleton and he's fitted in the snapback. We're snapping back. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Oh my god, I'm exhausted. I need to sleep for 3 days now. All that psychic energy is really taking it out of me.
Yeah, really draining. Well, that'll bring us to the end of this week's episode. If you liked the show, don't forget to go leave us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening to this, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever. Rate and review the show, please. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/podpeoplepod. Shout out to our honorary pod boys, Sam, Zach, and Micah. They're the ones who make it possible and who get to recommend movies to us like next week's episode. So if you want to be like them, head over to Patreon. You can follow us on Twitter at podpeoplepod and at letterboxd.com/podpeoplepod, where you'll find a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to those reviews. I'm still on Twitter. I'm hanging in there. It's going down, but I'm there at some spooky snake. If you're still on that sinking ship.
So my recommendation corner for the week. Recently I got a Steam Deck, and it is such a great device for playing games, but more than anything, it's a great emulation machine. So in a few clicks, you can set up all these retro emulators and play anything from, SNES to PS1 to PS2 to GameCube to N64, anything you can imagine. And a lot of these games are kind of forgotten about and just available on the Internet Archive. So yeah, play some older games. There's a lot of good ones out there.
It's so funny to me that this little Ben's review corner started with oh, check out this metal album no one's heard of. It's got 100 views on YouTube. To last week you were yo, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and now you're just sponssoring the Steam Deck. When did you become
No. I'm saying emulation. I'm saying emulate old games and play them because they're free.
Okay, that's
I
a
played.
funny.
Yeah. Most recent one that I played on there is a game called Sin and Punishment. It's a rail shooter for the N64. Only got a Japanese release.
Okay.
But it's a weird, fun romp. It reminds me a lot of Evangelion.
Well, the video game I played this week was Gollum, and I can't recommend it. I refuse to elaborate. Publicly. As always, a shout out to DreadXP. Go check out and play any and all of their games. We've been putting a lot of stuff out on Switch. Go check out Fishing Vacation. We just ported that to the Switch. It's a really cool little classic Game Boy style fishing game that incorporates horror in some fun ways. So there's lots of great stuff out there. Thanks.
Well, thank you for listening, and until next week, I don't know about you boys, but I need to go get out of this tuxedo that I've been